Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sales Syndicate Podcast. It feels like it's been a few weeks since we've recorded, so apologies if we're a little bit rusty. But today we're going to be talking about a question that comes up a lot, actually, or a misnomer, I think you could call it, in that people sort of understand that or believe that sales triggers and intent data are one and the same, when in fact they're not. So we're going to spend the next 30 or so minutes talking about what each of them are, the differences, the benefits, and why we believe that you should be using sales triggers instead of intent data. But I will just let my co-host or my guest introduce themselves before we crack on. So over to Nick.
Yes, thank you for that. So Nick, head of sales over at Selligence, and obviously the big focus for us as an organisation is focusing on, I'd probably say, the next trend really within the world of sales. It's, giving people more advancements or earlier triggers in terms of what's happening within the market and when's a good time to reach out to a business from a sales point of view. So looking forward to get stuck into this one. I think, as you said, this is often the biggest debate.
Paint a little bit of a picture. I think
pretty apparent
the examples that we've had recently, when we talk to people and say, have you heard about sales triggers? We've seen a lot, obviously, in terms of the market changing, and the response sometimes is, oh yeah, you mean intent data, right? And we sort of sat there like, not really, and then we have to go through the process of sort of educating them, if you like. So I guess that's what we're going to try and do today. So I think the natural place to start is covering off intent data, because I think everybody knows what intent data is. It's very familiar with it. It's been around for a good number of years. So as all salespeople know, Biff will know, especially identifying the right time to reach out to a buyer and understanding their needs ultimately is one of the biggest challenges. And that's where sales triggers and intent data do actually help. So intent data has been widely available for, it's probably 5 to 10 years even, that it's been sort of actively available. You can purchase it, you can use it to your advantage. So, what are the key differences? So if we just tick off the what is intent data, the obvious question. So intent data, I guess to put it simply, would capture signals of a person's behavior or an organization's behavior online, digitally, that might indicate that they're interested in a product or a service. To keep it simple, so essentially, it's a digital footprint for someone's journey across the internet, which shows signals that they might be interested in a product or a service. Now, that usually comes in sort of two main types, which is first party and third party. You may be familiar with these terms in relation to cookies. So first party cookies and third party cookies. Now, first party cookies or first party intent data is generated by a company's own digital channels and assets, such as their website or their social media accounts. And it's particularly useful for understanding how customers actually interact with the company's website, their journeys, how it can be optimized. And then on the flip side, I don't know why it's not called second party or third party. I guess it's called third party because when you're talking about a third party, that was a very silly statement to make. But anyway, so third party intent data is the flip side of that. So it's generated by external sources such as data providers, publishers, and that's particularly useful in understanding, I guess, the broader interests or identifying potential customers for your product or your service. So it can be collected through a variety of methods such as website tracking, IP monitoring, social media analysis, probably the three main ones. And you could say some companies, I would say the majority, if not almost all companies nowadays with a digital presence, will be using cookies first or third to their advantage or in some way, shape or form to build a profile of the customer's journey on their own site, but also build a profile of their ICP, their prospects, and how they're interacting in the market. So that's a very, very sort of quick whistle-stop tour of what intent data is. Now, as I've sort of gone through that, I guess you will have picked up on some of the advantages of that. So the real benefit of intent data is that you can, gain a picture of a person's online behavior, which might reveal their interests or their particular intentions in that given moment. So if let's just hypothetically say someone was searching for best CRM software or best sales intelligence software, and they visit a vendor's website, it might indicate that that person is interested in purchasing said CRM or solution, which is valuable for sales teams, marketing teams, RevOps, you name it, even CS teams. Now, in terms of why you might use that intent data, there's obviously a number of purposes. I think probably the most common for sales marketing teams. Apologies if you could hear the gong being hit and Ralph the Dachshund's barking, celebrating. But the two probably most common use cases would be for marketing and sales. So marketing can use it to personalize their data, to better align with their customers' interests and needs, to target at the right time, personalize the messaging, tailor the messaging, say if you're going to do an ABM campaign, for example, but also to align with, the market and the way people are interacting with things. And then on the other sort of side of it, the other department, sales, you could look for those intent signals, intent data to target your outreach in a more sustainable way, or at least target those that are potentially interested in your solution rather than just anyone and everyone. So that was a very quick run through of sort of what intent data is, the types of it, the benefits, and how it can be used. Now, I think the last thing to say before I hand over to Biff for the flip side of that, the sales trigger side, is that whilst intent data has its many advantages, some of those that we've already covered today, it's fairly old hat in the sales industry. Like we said, it's been around 5 to 10 years, and intent data doesn't necessarily in its own right provide all that much detail. So if I was to search on Google for how to increase my outbound efforts, and I read a blog and the blog's really great, I get some tips and tricks from it, and I start to employ those in my day-to-day, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be interested in buying that software. All I've done is transactional relationship. I've gone, I've learned something, I'm going to take that, and I am going to spend the next couple of weeks trying to work that into my day-to-day. But that, as I said, doesn't mean that I'm necessarily interested in that product or solution. And I think that's one of the fundamental, not necessarily flaws of intent data, but fundamental limitations of that intent data. So getting the right balance of that intent data, different levels of that intent is really, really key, which means that ultimately you're going to need various different other sources of information as well to stack that up again. So there's not really a black and white sort of picture of this person is very interested in the product with intent data, unless, of course, they come inbound requests and they put their hand up and said, I'd like to speak to you, at which point it is very black and white. But up until that point, just because someone's engaging with you on socials or looking at your website, it doesn't necessarily mean that they want your product. We have tens of thousands of people engaging with us on LinkedIn. I wish each of those 10,000 people were interested in buying our product. It would make our jobs a lot easier, but that's not the case. So appreciate that was a dump of information on intent data. So Biff, was there anything that you wanted to add on intent data, given that you speak to salespeople every single day?
My biggest thing with it, I've seen it, I've used it. There's a lot of nuances to it that are, can be quite frustrating. Sometimes a lot of the information that you actually have is way out of date. Perhaps actually like where they've actually finally managed to gather that information, process it, put it in a platform, whatever that may be. You can often find, actually it's 3-6 months out of date, and actually where they were. But probably my biggest question, how many times have you had a cold call, Jay? A good few times. Within that, if somebody said something to you, and let's say I call you, you've never heard of sales triggers, and I say, and you come off the phone and you go and Google sales triggers, then you're just trying to do some research in terms of, perhaps what were they on about, et cetera, et cetera. But actually what that will start to do is actually register that as intent. So there's a lot of different different use cases for that behind the scenes, but I say it can be a real nuance really in terms of, quite frustration in terms of actually, is that data accurate? Is it getting us actually what we need? But yeah, that's probably the biggest indicator.
An example, probably 2 weeks ago, went on I guess you could call it sales intelligence provider's website, and I had an email about 48 hours later saying, understand you might be interested in our solution. It'd be great to get some time in the diary. And it's just like, well, no, I went on your page for a fleeting moment to get an answer to a question or to have a look at an image, something. Yeah, as a marketer, I'm probably having a look at colors or images, aren't I? Let's be honest. So to have someone reaching out to me saying, I'd love to get some time in your diary, could you visit your website? It just feels a bit, I don't know, a little bit strange. Like watching people on your journey online, it just doesn't feel quite right in terms of that being a gauge for how interested someone is in a solution.
Well, I think, again, everybody talks around, sales, it's about building relationships. At the end of the day, that's the absolute foundation to it. But, where does that relationship start, or research to a degree? I suppose, people can go off and do, additional work in terms of how they approach it. But if you've got your average salesman that's reaching out and saying, hey, by the way, I know that you've been on our website, I wouldn't call that a very warm introduction. You're probably much more likely to get a bit of a fob off and a bit of an F off in terms of that cold outreach. You want to go in and actually have a purpose and have a warm introduction to that person, rather than you just
mentioned an interesting thing in terms of that lag period, delay, long tail, whatever you want to call it. So let's just hypothetically say that there is someone selling intent data, I don't know, let's call them Tom Bora, and they would provide that data to various companies or teams that want to utilize that to target or better segment their outbound efforts, right? What's typically the feedback you get or what you've heard? What is the lag period for a supplier in terms of sharing that intent data?
It depends, really, and I suppose it's where the direct source of that information is from. So have you got somebody else that's plugging in another provider's data? Actually, what are the commercials behind that, first and foremost? Is it that they're on a live API? Is it that data gets refreshed every 3 months that's then being delivered? They're probably the real key bits that I'd want to get into if I was purchasing that data. But if you're getting it from, the original source, it's probably much more in that instance, understanding in terms of, at what point do they consider that as intent data? Is it via a certain organization running, 10 searches that are very, very similar within that, at which point that would be classed as a, high intent, because obviously there's multiple parties within that organization looking at for that service or that type of product? Or is it more of a signal of somebody searched for it and there's one individual? And I say, in terms of that, then that's really where all the other factors start to come into play. How does that come about? Why is it that they're searching for that information? As I said, is it just from a cold call and they're just literally trying to do some research? Is it something they've just seen on perhaps their LinkedIn feed and they're like, oh, what's that? Oh, I'll have a quick look. I'll research it myself. That's really where you want to get into the depths.
I guess it's that lack of context
basically
behind
what's the clarity or what's the depth of that
because,
data.
Just because someone displays a certain behavior, it doesn't mean that they fall within your target ICP bucket, whatever you want to call it.
Put it this way, I've spoken to other people where I know they've plugged in third-party providers of intent data. So they've gone out, partnered with another business, obviously paying for the data that they're receiving, but actually that data is only updated for them every 6 months. So if you're getting sudden signals of, oh, by the way, let's say it's June, magically it's the start of H2 for that business, and now I've got all these intent signals that are coming through. That's great, but they're probably from January, or a good bunch of them are. And obviously what you've done then is pretty much missed like budget season and everything around that. So, you're lagging it. And ultimately, I know, that information still being sold on is like accurate and all the rest of it. So I'd really start to get into the weeds in terms of, real.
Cool. Okay, right. So we've done the portion of intent data. So let's flip it. I'll hand it over to you for the bulk of this. But I think in terms of that sales triggers versus intent data, I think one of the phrases that we've kind of coined or dubbed, or a really easy way to sort of, explain what sales triggers are, is we like to think of those insights that sales triggers offers as pre-intent data, because that kind of summarizes it really, really easily. That sales triggers can get you in the game one step earlier, 2, 3 steps, whatever you want to call it, and give you those facts or give you those that relevant context in order to reach out. So what are sales triggers? Let's kick off with that.
Sales triggers are essentially insight or factual knowledge of what a business is doing. And that might be through growth. It might be through key stakeholder movements. It may be actually that they've announced another partnership with another organization. But probably the easiest way to define this or certainly explain it is around let's say, key decision maker moving from one organization to another. Now, person X moves from company A and they move into company B. Directly and straight away, you can get a sales trigger to say, by the way, this person has announced that they have moved and they have started at that organization. Now, typically, that takes place on day one. That's put up on LinkedIn. Fantastic. I've moved positions. I've joined company B. This is now where I'm at. Sales trigger tells you to say, Jay, this person's just moved into that organization. Brilliant. Now, typically, if you've got a key stakeholder that's moving, I think the target is they'll spend around 80 or 90% of their budget within the first 100 days within that role. So they're looking straight away, they're going to be looking at, new tools, new processes, things that they've been brought in to do in terms of improving the way that organization works. So once they've got into that organization, they've probably spent realistically 2 weeks to 4 weeks actually analyzing in terms of internal processes, what's going wrong, where are the holes. They haven't even started looking for anything else yet, right? So now they start looking on Google and saying, okay, we need a new CRM, let's say. Okay, so they now start Googling, they're starting to look around that. The intent data is then being gathered in the background. It's eventually being fed through to those organizations 2 weeks post that, let's say, if that data is live. So currently, this individual is now 6 weeks into their role. They've probably got a pretty good idea in terms of what they've used in the past, what's worked, what hasn't. So now you're currently 6 to 8 weeks down the line with intent data saying, by the way, this person's looking to purchase this software. Now, from a sales trigger point of view, what we've done is notify that individual on day one. So as soon as that person's walked in that door, we've gone, by the way, there's a new CTO, let's say, that's joined company B. Now's a good time to start building a relationship with that individual because they're going to start spending budget. And actually, you're having those conversations way ahead of any other competitors. So the amount of influence that you can provide, product demos, even looking at trials across that organization, across the team to get them familiar with your product is way, way ahead of the companies that are being notified 6 to 8 weeks down the line. Now, that's probably, the easiest example to explain, but it goes much wider. Again, the first things companies are going to do, let's say if they, a bigger corporate business and they're potentially looking at opening a new office within the EU, you're going to start to see press releases about it. You're going to see them start to talk around it within interviews, within potential expansion plans across newspapers, etc. That is a sales trigger. That is telling you, by the way, they are going to be launching over into, Germany, perhaps, wherever it may be, where actually by the time that they've actually sorted out a new office, they've sorted out, perhaps the recruitment needs that they're going to need to open up that office. The next step for them is to say, okay, what tools do we need within that specific location? Now, again, we've notified them way, way before those events start to take place. So typically, it may even be a couple of weeks. It might be just 2 weeks, but sometimes it can be up to 8 weeks in advance, really of where those individuals have been notified of those events that ultimately are going to lead to spend.
And you gave a very, very in-depth example of one of those track job changes, market movers, which got me thinking as well in terms of when someone moves company, if you already know that they were a user of your software in the previous company and they've moved to a new company, bam. Statistics show they're 3 times more likely to buy again because they loved you at their previous company and they need to make a really big dent. They need to make their mark and they're going to be they're going to be incredibly open to talking about bringing the software across because they know it works. aside from that example then, so types of sales trigger, let's maybe just give a little taster of the sorts of things, 3 to 5. What are the more common ones that we tend to talk about?
Common ones, I'd say, within the market, there would be a huge amount around regulatory activity. So things looking at, especially within like reg tech market, anybody that they're trying to reach out to. So, the emerging markets, so it might be like fintech, for example. It might be, obviously FS as a whole, but then breaking that down further into like crypto, blockchain, etc. Huge amount within that to, obviously track perhaps where there's been data breaches, perhaps been fines that have been issued. It may be non-compliance issues. All of these things ultimately are going to lead to these organizations saying, okay, we've got to streamline our processes. We've got to make them more efficient and ultimately more concrete. So what can we bring in rather than having to hire 3, 4, 5 specialists within that? What can we bring in that's going to help
Let's go on to
smoothing that process for us? Another one would be, typically around, I know we mentioned market movers and regional expansion. So, new product launch, for example. Within that new product launch, what then is going to come off the back of that? So again, what other tools do they need? That's going to perhaps make the sign-up process easier. Maybe it's the payment processing in the background. Is that, a good example in terms of, how are they going to actually take this product to market? Are they going to lead with a PLG motion? Are they going to lead from more sales-led? There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different sales triggers, but it's understanding in terms of, what are the most important to you in terms of obviously the product that you're selling into those organizations, and what does that sales trigger signify in terms of how your products may help them, essentially accelerate their process there, or like go-to-market strategy much quicker.
You're going to understand the sales triggers that are relevant to your business. I think one of our product guys was having a conversation with one of the leading, integration platforms. The middleman between software A and software B and plugin creating bespoke integrations. So they were talking to that company, and that company said, actually, well, we know our most valuable trigger. And I think it was product launches. So they said, when we see a company is releasing a new product, absolutely, we can get on the phone and say, well, we can help you guys integrate and connect to look at all these other products that we already integrate and connect with. So that was an extremely valuable trigger, and pretty much the only trigger that those guys were interested in. So there's a plethora, there's an encyclopedic, whatever the phrase would be, mass of these triggers, but there's obviously ones that are far more beneficial. So in terms of those benefits then, what would you say the 3 key benefits are to sales triggers?
One, in terms of receiving real-time information, that would be absolutely key. The second part of it really is it guaranteeing that information is factual. So from a sales trigger point of view, it's coming from that business. That business is releasing that news to say, by the way, this is what we're doing, this is how we're evolving, etc. It's either their PR team or it's their internal teams that are actually writing that piece of information to put it out there. So whereas intent can be a little bit, dubious in terms of, who's searching for it, how many times it's been searched for, etc. This is the business going out and saying, by the way, we are doing this. There is no clearer bit of information that can give you a head start. So that would be the second. The third really is being able to really look at a multitude of different opportunities. I think the typical, or let's say historic way of sales is, okay, what companies have raised funding? Well, I'm sorry to say, if some companies raise funding and you've just found out, you're too late because there's 1,000,001 other salespeople on it. What other opportunities can you look at that's going to lead your product into?
I'll add one extra into the mix, which is probably my favourite, or at least the one that I think we seem to get some extremely positive feedback on in terms of triggers just generally, which is the time-saving aspect of it. So if you're able to efficiently monitor these sales triggers, rather than having to go out and hunt for companies that fit certain behaviors or whatever, these triggers are just firing in the background, giving you a steady stream of these opportunities that are perfect, which can save, I think 50% is what we're seeing in terms of the amount of time you spend prospecting, which is, it's something like 400 hours a year, which equates to 3 months. So you get 3 months of your time back a year, which is just ridiculous to think about.
Oh, there's not one salesperson on this earth that enjoys prospecting. I can guarantee that. So the quicker you can speed that up and get most of it out of your way, the better.
Okay, then, right. So we've covered intent data. So what it is, the types of it, the benefits of it, and why some companies choose to use it or they should use it. We've now covered what sales triggers are, various different types of sales triggers, and the benefits of them. So if you were just going to sort of summarize in a nutshell why a sales rep, someone in marketing, someone in RevOps, customer success, or staffing, why should they use sales triggers over intent data? And, how would they be selling themselves short? Or how would they be starting on the back foot if they chose not
to? Probably the biggest really is, say, get in there ahead of your competition. Remove that as a barrier and actually get in there before anybody else within your market who you're constantly coming up against is getting the information to engage. So get in there nice and early. From day one, you can start to build that relationship and essentially remove or eliminate, some of the dependent factors within the process. Now, the second really is helping you to broaden your horizons a little bit. The possibility of you going through the whole of your LinkedIn Sales Nav search where you've got thousands and thousands of people in there and still new companies being born each and every single day or new people coming into your ICP, allow a product to do it for you. Allow it to go out there, find the wider news, and actually bring these businesses to you rather than you having to go out across a European market and try and map the whole thing out. You're never ever going to achieve it. So bringing you broader chance of opportunity with businesses perhaps otherwise you weren't aware of. And the third and final piece really would be, I suppose, just having the facts with it. Being able to open up a conversation around, really sounding like you've done your research on that business rather than having to go out. So it's, fantastic, great news about your new product launch. How's that then, evolving or perhaps even integrating into your existing products or your current product suite? What benefits do you think that's then going to bring or bring into your clients? Being able to have that level of conversation is only going to be able to build better rapport with your prospects and
on that point
and ultimately
of,
better trust as well throughout that sales process.
The data we're seeing, especially more recently in the downsizing market, is that by using these sales triggers and having that context and that relevancy can actually increase your outbound success, i.e. increase the number of demos that you're able to book when you're connecting and you're talking to people by 3 to 5 times, which, like you said, anyone who can half the amount of time prospecting, if you said to a sales rep, do you want to increase your outbound success 3 times? You said to Aaron, do you want to book 3 times more demos? They bite your hand off. So I think it really is, the data is showing that 2023 and beyond, this is where you need to be operating in. But I think we're going to wrap up pretty quickly there. I think Biff is on one maybe 0% battery, so we're going to wrap it up there. Hopefully you've learned a bit more about the comparisons and the differences between intent data and sales triggers data. But yeah, thanks for joining. Look forward to catching up in the next episode.